So today, let's dive into a moment in history that could have completely shattered a civilization right as it was being born. It's an incredible story of crisis, rebellion, and the almost unbearable weight of leadership when the founder is suddenly gone. This is the story of the Wars of Apostasy.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll set the stage and look at the massive crisis that just exploded after the prophet's death. Then, we'll see how his successor's leadership was put on trial, and we'll zoom in on a key battle that really turned the tide. We'll also have to talk about the other threats that were popping up, the really tough questions of justice after the war, and finally, what kind of lasting blueprint this whole period left behind. Okay, so just try to imagine this for a second. The Prophet Muhammad, the man who was the unifying leader, the spiritual guide for the entire Arabian Peninsula, he's just passed away. The community that he built from the ground up is in a state of shock, and in that sudden vacuum of power, chaos starts to bubble up. And that really is the central question they were facing, isn't it? I mean, how does a brand new community, a new state, even begin to survive losing its very heart and soul? The answer was not obvious at all, and believe me, the early signs, they were not looking good. Almost instantly, rebellions just erupted everywhere. And these acts of apostasy, they weren't just a crisis of faith. This was a full-blown political rebellion against the central authority in Medina. For some tribes, it was about refusing to pay the zakah, that obligatory charity that was like a core pillar of the new state. For others, it was a total rejection of Islam altogether. And into this messy power vacuum stepped these really charismatic figures who started claiming prophethood for themselves, gathering armies, and threatening the very existence of the community. So, into this absolute chaos steps the new leader, the Caliph, Abu Bakr, one of the Prophet's closest and most trusted companions. And right away, his leadership was put to the ultimate test. Was he going to compromise to try and hold this fragile state together, or would he stand firm on principle, no matter what? Faced with what looked like total collapse, Abu Bakr's response was just unwavering. He made it clear there would be zero negotiation on the core principles of the faith. Even when some of his advisors were pushing him, to take a more politically convenient path, he insisted on one thing above all else, following the exact path laid out by the Prophet. His response was going to be military, and it was going to be decisive. And you see, this wasn't just Abu Bakr's personal style. It was a very conscious decision to embody what the Quran calls the excellent pattern of the Prophet. For Abu Bakr, the only way forward, the only way through a crisis this big, was to strictly follow the precedent set by the leader who came before him. He had to be that example in everything he said and everything he did. And this principled leadership, it wasn't just talk, right? It had to be proven where it mattered most, on the battlefield. So let's take a look at one of the most critical showdowns of this entire war, the Battle for Buzakhah. Okay, so the main antagonist here is a guy named Tulayhah. He had declared himself a prophet and managed to get several powerful tribes to follow him. Now, to counter this huge threat, Abu Bakr dispatched his most formidable general, an absolute military genius named Khalid ibn al-Waleed. This was the message Khalid sent to the rebel armies. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some boast. It was a deadly, serious psychological weapon. He was signaling that his soldiers were fighting for a cause they believed was worth more than their own lives. And the enemy? They knew from past experience that the Muslims were completely sincere about that. The battle itself was just a masterclass in both strategy and motivation. Khalid used these brilliant tactics, even convincing a key enemy tribe to flip sides and join him mid-campaign. His army, driven by this powerful belief, was just relentless. Tulayhah's coalition completely crumbled, and he ended up fleeing the battlefield on horseback. This victory, this was the turning point. It broke the back of the rebellion and brought many, many tribes back into the fold of Islam. But here's the thing, Tulayhah wasn't some isolated case. This was a widespread problem, and Abu Bakr was basically fighting fires on multiple fronts at once. The story of another self-proclaimed prophet, a woman named Sajjah, really shows you just how complex and dangerous this situation had become. So Sajjah was a Christian Arab woman who also claimed to be a prophet. She raised an army, marched south, and gathered allies as she went. Her initial plan was actually to attack Medina itself, but then she pivoted, deciding instead to join forces with the most powerful false prophet of them all, a man named Musaylimah.
And get this, their alliance was sealed with a marriage. When Sajjah's people asked what her dowry was, she sent a messenger to Musaylimah. His response? He just abolished 2 of the 5 daily prayers, the dawn and evening prayers, for all their followers. This little detail just perfectly captures what these movements were all about. A strange mix of political power grabs and just arbitrarily changing core religious rules on a whim.
So winning the war was really only the first step. What came next was arguably an even greater test of leadership. How do you deliver justice? How do you deal with former rebels, with traitors, with enemies who just yesterday were trying to kill you? Let's look at the case of this one man, al-Faja'ah. He comes to Abu Bakr pretending to be a loyal Muslim, and he asks for weapons and an army to go fight the rebels. Abu Bakr grants his request, but al-Faja'ah immediately betrays that trust. He uses the army to attack and rob other Muslims. So when he was finally captured, his punishment was severe. It sent a very clear message about treachery. Now, compare his fate to Tulayhah's, the false prophet from the big battle. This is so important. Al-Faja'ah was a traitor who used deception to harm his own people. Tulayhah, on the other hand, had been an open enemy. After his defeat, he eventually fled, but later, he sincerely repented and came back to Islam. And his fate? It was completely different. When Tulayhah later came to perform the pilgrimage and passed through Medina, people ran to Abu Bakr and said, "Hey, Tulayhah is here." And the Caliph's response was just so simple. He said, "What would I do with him? Let him go, for Allah has guided him to Islam." He drew this incredibly sharp line between treacherous betrayal and open warfare that's followed by sincere repentance. So how do we tie all of this together? Well, these choices in how to wage war, how to deliver justice, how to lead, they didn't just solve an immediate crisis. They established a powerful model, a pattern that would be studied for generations to come. Ultimately, Abu Bakr's legacy is really one of principle over politics. His absolute adherence to the precedent set by the Prophet, that excellent pattern, was the foundation for everything. His justice was sharp and discerning, able to tell the difference between treachery and genuine repentance. And his leadership was prudent, carefully bringing former enemies back into the community to ensure its long-term health and stability. And all of this leaves us with a really fundamental question about leadership, one that's just as relevant today. In the face of a true existential threat, should a leader bend with the political winds to be pragmatic, or should they stand firm on a set of core principles, no matter the cost? The story of Abu Bakr gives us one very powerful and very historic answer.